Three men were trying to kill the Korean Mafia boss in a narrow alley behind 9th Street. This wasn't a robbery anymore. They had already taken his watch. His wallet was lying in the dirt. His phone had been crushed under someone's boot. They kept going because they weren't there to steal. They were there to finish the job. Every punch landed with purpose. Every kick was aimed to break something that wouldn't heal. Every second they stayed meant someone powerful wanted Kang Jae-Ryun dead. The boss lay against the brick wall, blood running down his face, one hand pressed against his stomach, trying to breathe through the pain. Nobody came to help. Nobody stepped into the alley. Nobody wanted trouble with men like that. Until a girl walked out of the shadows at the far end of the street. She was wearing a white school shirt, a dark blue skirt, and earphones in her ears, like she was just walking home from class. The three men didn't even look at her at first. People like her didn't belong in fights like this. Earlier that same day, Victor Halverson had laughed in her face outside the apartment building she lived in. "You people should be grateful you even have a place here," he told her, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A broke little girl like you doesn't get to ask questions." Nobody defended her. Nobody said a word. Nobody thought she could do anything about it. But the moment she stepped into that alley, everything changed. One move from that girl forced three grown men to their knees. Within hours, the video was everywhere. Nobody knew her name yet. Nobody knew why she did it. Nobody knew why the Korean Mafia boss stayed silent when the police asked who saved his life. But the entire city was about to find out. Her name was Nyara Vance. She lived on the 3rd floor of a cracked brick building on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood most people only talked about when something went wrong. Most people who saw her thought she was just another quiet girl trying to stay out of trouble. They had no idea she had spent the last 5 years learning exactly what to do the moment trouble found her. And the night three men tried to kill Kang Jae-Ryun, trouble found the wrong girl. Most people in Nyara Vance's neighborhood learned early how to move without being noticed. The sidewalks were always busy, the buildings always loud, and the air always carried the feeling that something could go wrong without warning. People kept their heads down. They spoke only when necessary. They learned which streets to avoid after dark, and which doors never opened for anyone who knocked. Nyara learned all of that before she turned 12. She lived on the 3rd floor of an old brick building on the south side of Chicago, the kind of place where the elevator never worked and the hallway lights flickered even in the middle of the day. The paint on the walls peeled in long strips, and the radiators rattled all winter, like they were warning the building itself to hold together a little longer. She shared the apartment with her aunt, Lorna Vance, who worked nights cleaning offices downtown and slept most mornings with the curtains closed to keep the sunlight out. Money was always tight, rent was always late, and every month there was a new notice taped somewhere in the hallway reminding everyone that the building had new management now. Nyara never complained about any of it. She woke up before school every day, made breakfast with whatever was left in the refrigerator, and checked the locks on the door twice before leaving. She walked the same route every morning, past the corner store with the broken sign, past the bus stop where nobody smiled, past the chain-link fence around the empty lot where kids used to play before the city shut it down. To anyone watching, she looked like every other quiet girl trying to get through the day without trouble. Nobody knew where she went after school. 3 blocks past the apartment building, behind an old community center with boarded windows and a cracked parking lot, there was a side entrance most people never noticed. The sign above it had fallen years ago, but the door still opened if you knocked twice and waited. Inside, the lights were always on. That was where Nyara trained. The man who ran the place was called Marcus Hale. Most people in the neighborhood knew him as the quiet veteran who fixed broken fences and never talked about the past. The few who stepped inside the center knew something else. Marcus didn't teach kids how to fight. He taught them how to stand. Balance first, breathing second, control before strength. Nyara had started going there when she was 13, after a boy twice her size tried to shove her off the bus steps and laughed when she fell. Marcus didn't ask questions when she showed up. He just pointed to the mat and told her to stand still. For months, that was all she did. Stand, step, turn, again. No shouting, no showing off, no anger. You don't move first, Marcus told her once, watching her hold the same stance for what felt like hours. You move when you have no choice, and when you do, you finish it fast. Nyara never missed a day after that. She trained after school, she trained on weekends, she trained when her legs hurt and when her hands shook, and when she was too tired to think. Because in her world, strength wasn't about winning fights, it was about surviving the ones you couldn't avoid. By the time she turned 16, most people still didn't notice her when she walked down the street. That was the way she liked it, because the less people looked at you, the less they saw coming when the moment finally arrived. In Nyara's neighborhood, people didn't talk about power the way they did on television. Nobody mentioned corporations or city councils or investors in suits. Power was simpler than that. Power was the name written at the bottom of the notice taped to your door. Power was the voice on the phone telling you the rent had gone up again. Power was the man everyone complained about in private but never argued with in public. His name was Victor Halverson. Most people had never seen him up close, but everyone knew who he was. His company had taken over half the buildings on the south side in less than 2 years. Old landlords disappeared, new contracts showed up, rents changed, rules changed, and suddenly the people who had lived in those apartments for decades were being told they didn't belong there anymore. Victor didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he didn't need to. His power worked quietly, the way pressure works on glass, slow, steady, and impossible to ignore. Nyara first saw him on a cold morning outside her building, the day the new notices went up in the hallway. A black sedan was parked at the curb, cleaner than anything else on the street. 2 men stood near the door, both wearing dark coats and watching everyone who walked past like they were counting faces. Victor stood between them, talking to the building manager, his hands in the pockets of a long gray coat that probably cost more than most people in the neighborhood made in a month. He didn't look like a man who needed to raise his voice. Tall, clean-shaven, hair cut sharp and perfect, eyes that didn't stay on anyone long enough to care. Nyara tried to walk past without slowing down. "Hey," Victor said, not loud, but enough to make her stop. She turned, already wishing she hadn't. He looked at the paper in his hand, then at her, then back at the building like he was checking numbers in his head. "You live here?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He nodded once, like the answer didn't matter. "Tell your aunt the rent adjustment goes into effect next month. No exceptions." Nyara didn't say anything. Most people wouldn't. Victor watched her for a moment longer, his eyes moving from her worn sneakers to the sleeve of her school shirt, then to the earphones hanging around her neck. "You people always wait until the last minute to complain," he said, almost bored. "Then you act surprised when the rules change." The building manager laughed softly, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to. Nyara felt the words land, but she kept her face still. Marcus had taught her that too. Don't react. Don't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing what they did. Victor shook his head once and turned away, already done with her. To him, she was just another tenant, another name on a list, another person who could be moved out when the time came. The sedan door opened and he stepped inside without looking back. The car pulled away slowly, like it had all the time in the world. Nyara stood on the sidewalk a moment longer, the cold air biting at her face, the notice still folded in her hand. She didn't crumple it, she didn't tear it, she just slipped it into her bag and started walking toward school. In her world, men like Victor Halverson didn't need to touch you to change your life. Sometimes all they had to do was decide you didn't matter. The notices started showing up 2 weeks after Victor Halverson's visit. At first, they were small things, easy to ignore if you wanted to believe nothing had really changed. A letter slid under the door instead of mailed. A new rule taped to the elevator that never worked anyway. A reminder about late fees printed in bold red ink, like the paper itself was angry. Nyara's aunt didn't say much when she saw them. She would read the page once, folded carefully along the crease, and set it on the kitchen table like it was something that might break if she held it too tight. "Just paperwork," Lorna said one night, her voice tired from the long shift. "They do this every time new owners come in." But the paperwork didn't stop. The rent adjustment notice came next, then the maintenance fee, then the warning about overdue balance that nobody remembered owing. Each letter sounded polite. Each one used the same careful words: failure to comply, final reminder, immediate attention required. Nothing in them said threat. Everything in them felt like one. Nyara started checking the hallway before she unlocked the apartment door, her eyes moving to the bulletin board near the stairs, where new papers kept appearing. Some days there were 3 at once, all printed with the same company logo at the top: Halverson Property Group. People in the building talked about it in low voices, usually when they thought nobody else was listening. Mrs. Delgado on the second floor said her rent had gone up twice in 1 month. The old man near the laundry room said his lease suddenly didn't exist anymore. Someone on the first floor swore the water got shut off for a whole day after he argued with the office on the phone. Nobody went to complain in person. Everyone knew where the complaints ended up. One afternoon, Nyara came home from school and found a yellow envelope taped to the apartment door instead of slipped underneath. Her aunt was already standing in the hallway, holding it in both hands like it weighed more than paper should. "What is it?" Nyara asked quietly. Lorna didn't answer right away. She just peeled the tape off the wood and handed the envelope over. Nyara opened it and read the first line twice before the words made sense. Notice of balance review. The number printed below it was higher than 3 months of rent. "That's not right," Nyara said. Her aunt shook her head slowly. "I know." There was a phone number at the bottom of the page. Nyara could feel her aunt looking at it like it was something dangerous. "You want me to call?" Nyara asked. Lorna hesitated, then nodded once. They went inside and Nyara dialed the number, holding the phone between both hands like Marcus had taught her to hold steady when something mattered. The call didn't ring long. A man answered, his voice calm, almost bored. "Halverson Group?" Nyara swallowed once. "There's a mistake on our balance notice," she said. "The amount isn't—" "It's not a mistake," the man cut in. Nyara stopped talking. He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound rude. He sounded like someone reading from a list. "If the balance isn't cleared by the end of the month, the unit will be scheduled for review." "What does that mean?" Nyara asked. A short pause. Then the man spoke again. The same flat tone, the same careful words. "It means," he said, "you should start looking for somewhere else to go." The line went quiet after that. Nyara lowered the phone slowly, her fingers tightening around it without her noticing. Her aunt didn't ask what he said. She could see it on Nyara's face. For the first time since the notices started coming, the apartment felt smaller than it had ever had before. Not because anything had changed inside it, because someone outside had decided they didn't belong there anymore. In the parts of the city where people wore suits instead of work boots, the name Kang Jae-Ryun was never said out loud unless the doors were closed first. Some called him a businessman, some called him a criminal. Most people just called him careful. He owned restaurants nobody could afford, warehouses nobody asked about, and office buildings with security guards who never smiled. His companies were registered under different names, different partners, different addresses, but everyone who paid attention knew the same thing. Nothing in that part of the city moved without Kang knowing about it. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He didn't give interviews, and his picture almost never appeared in the news. That was part of the reason people were afraid of him. Men who needed attention were easy to understand. Men who stayed quiet were harder to predict. The first time most people saw him in person, they were surprised. He wasn't tall. He wasn't built like a fighter. He looked like a man who spent more time behind a desk than in the street. black suit, white shirt, dark hair always combed back, even late at night, eyes that never stayed on one person long enough to show what he was thinking. But the way everyone else in the room moved when he walked in told the real story. Conversations stopped without anyone saying stop. Chairs straightened. Phones disappeared from hands. Respect came first. Fear came right behind it. Kang Jae-Ryun had built his reputation on one thing more than anything else. He never lost control. There were stories people told when they thought nobody important was listening. Stories about deals that went wrong, about men who tried to cheat him, about people who thought they could take something that belonged to him and walk away. Those stories always ended the same way, quietly. No shouting, no headlines, no bodies left where anyone could see them. Just a message passed from one person to another until everyone understood the rule. You don't push Kang Jae-Ryun unless you're ready for what happens next. Lately, though, the city had been changing. New investors were buying old buildings. New companies were moving money through places that used to belong to someone else. Names nobody had heard before started showing up on contracts, on permits, on ownership papers. Victor Halverson's name was one of them. At first, Kang didn't react. He watched. He always watched first. Files crossed his desk with addresses circled in red, reports from men who kept track of things most people never noticed. Property transfers, sudden renovations, tenants being forced out faster than usual, businesses closing without explanation. Nothing illegal on paper. Too many coincidences in reality. One evening, long after the offices had emptied, Kang stood by the window of his top-floor suite looking down at the city lights sprout below him. One of his men waited near the door, holding a folder he hadn't been told to open yet. "They're moving closer," the man said quietly. Kang didn't turn around. "I know." Another pause. "They think you won't react," the man added. Kang's reflection in the glass didn't change. For a moment, the room was so quiet the hum of the lights sounded loud. Then Kang spoke, his voice calm, almost bored. "Everyone thinks that," he said. He picked up his coat from the chair beside the desk, straightened the sleeve once, and headed for the door. No one in that room could remember the last time anyone had tried to take something from Kang Jae-Ryun by force, and lived long enough to talk about it. That night, he left the building without his usual escort, just one car, no extra guards. Sometimes, the most dangerous moment for a man who never falls is the one time he thinks he doesn't need to watch his back. The alley behind 9th Street wasn't the kind of place people walked through unless they had no other choice. The streetlights didn't reach far enough to touch the ground between the buildings, and the walls on both sides leaned in close, like they were trying to keep whatever happened there from being seen. Trash bags sat piled near the dumpsters, the smell of old rain and rust ending in the air. Even during the day, the place felt like it belonged to the night. That was why the car slowed down when it reached the corner. Kang Jae-Ryun noticed it the moment the driver hesitated. He had told them to drop him off a block early. He didn't like arriving at the front of the building when meetings ran late. Too many eyes. Too many people who thought watching him walk told them something about him. "Here," he said quietly. The car stopped. One of the guards in the front seat turned slightly. "You want us to—" "I said here." The guard nodded and didn't argue again. Kang stepped out, buttoning his coat as the car pulled away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance until the alley was quiet again. For a moment, nothing moved. Just the hum of the city somewhere far off, and the faint drip of water from a pipe running down the brick wall. He had taken 3 steps when the sound came from behind him. Footsteps. Not fast. Not loud. Too close. Kang turned just as the first man grabbed his shoulder and slammed him into the wall. The impact knocked the air from his chest before he could react. His back hit the bricks hard enough to blur his vision for a second, and by the time it cleared, 2 more figures had stepped out of the darkness. All 3 were big. Not street kids. Not amateurs. Men built for this kind of work. The one holding him was bald,
arms thick like cables, his grip tight enough to keep Kang pinned without effort. "Wallet," the man said, flat like he was reading instructions. Kang didn't move. The second man stepped forward and pulled the watch from his wrist, then the phone from his pocket, dropping both into his jacket without looking. They could have stopped there. Most robberies did. Instead, the third man drove his fist into Kang's stomach, hard enough to fold him forward even with the other man holding him up. Kang's breath left him in a sharp, quiet sound he couldn't stop. Another punch came, this one to the ribs. Then another. No shouting. No threats. Just the dull sound of impact echoing off the brick walls. They weren't rushing. They weren't nervous. They were working. Kang tried to push back once, his hand catching the bald man's arm for half a second before the grip tightened and slammed him against the wall again. The second man stepped closer, his voice low. "Make it quick," he muttered. The bald one shook his head slightly. "We were told not to." Another hit landed, this time across Kang's face, snapping his head to the side and sending him down to one knee. Blood ran warm along his lip, then down his chin, dripping onto the concrete. He stayed there, one hand on the ground, the other pressed against his side, breathing slow, forcing the air in even though every breath hurt. They circled him now, like the job wasn't finished yet, like it wouldn't be finished until he stopped moving. One of them raised his foot to kick again. And that was when a voice came from the far end of the alley. "Stop." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It didn't need to be. All three men froze for a second, just long enough to look toward the shadows near the streetlight. A girl was standing there, earphones hanging around her neck, one hand at her side, the other holding something they hadn't noticed yet. She didn't look scared. She didn't look surprised. She just looked at them like she had already decided what was about to happen next.
For a second, nobody moved. The alley went quiet in that strange way it does when something unexpected happens, like the air itself is waiting to see what comes next. The three men turned toward the voice, their shadows stretching across the pavement under the weak streetlight. Nyara stood at the far end of the alley, just inside the line where the light faded into darkness. Her backpack hung from one shoulder, her earphones resting against her collar like she had only stopped for a moment on her way home. The bald man frowned, confused more than worried. "You lost?" he said, his voice rough, irritated at the interruption. Nyara didn't answer. Her eyes moved once, quick and steady, taking in everything the way Marcus had taught her. Distance, foot placement, hands, weight. Three men, one injured, one closest, one watching the exit, one ready to swing again. She stepped forward once. "Let him go," she said. The second man laughed under his breath, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You hear this?" he muttered to the others. "Kid thinks this is her business." The bald man tightened his grip on Kang's collar and pulled him up just enough to keep him from falling. "Walk away," he told her. "Now." Nyara kept walking. Not fast, not slow, just straight toward them, her shoes making almost no sound on the concrete. By the time they realized she wasn't stopping, she was already close enough for the streetlight to hit her face. Calm, focused, no hesitation. The third man stepped forward, annoyed now. "Hey," he snapped, "you deaf or—" He never finished the sentence. Nyara moved, one step in, one turn, one hand catching his wrist before he even understood she was close enough to touch him. Marcus's voice echoed in her head at the same way it always did. "Don't fight strength. Move balance." She twisted, shifting her weight low and pulling his arm across his own body. His feet left the ground before his mind caught up, his shoulder hitting the pavement with a crack that echoed off the brick walls. The sound froze the other two in place. For half a second, nobody breathed. The bald man let go of Kang without meaning to, his eyes locked on the man on the ground, groaning and clutching his arm. "What the—" Nyara's hand went into her backpack. When it came back out, the pistol was already steady in her grip. She raised it with one hand, the motion smooth, controlled like she had done it 100 times before. "Don't," she said. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The second man lifted his hands slowly, his expression changing faster than his body could keep up. "Hey, easy." The bald one looked at the gun, then at the man on the ground, then back at Nyara. For the first time since the attack started, his face didn't look sure of anything. "You don't want to do this," he said. Nyara didn't blink. "Hands behind your head," she said. He hesitated. She tilted the gun slightly, just enough to show she wasn't guessing. "Now." One by one, the men dropped to their knees. First, the one who had laughed, then the one still holding his shoulder, finally the bald one, slower than the others, but not slow enough to risk it. All three knelt on the cold concrete, hands locked behind their heads, breathing hard, their shadows shaking against the wall. Nyara didn't lower the gun. Behind them, Kang Jae-Ryun pushed himself up against the brick, one hand pressed to his side, blood on his shirt, his eyes fixed on the girl standing in front of the men who had just tried to kill him. He had seen fights his entire life. He had seen men bigger, stronger, faster than anyone in that alley. He had never seen 3 of them brought to their knees in less than 5 seconds. Nyara didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the attackers, her voice steady, like this moment had already happened in her mind long before it ever reached the street. "Stay down," she said quietly. None of them moved. For a few seconds after the men dropped to their knees, the alley stayed silent, except for the sound of breathing. One of the attackers shifted slightly, then froze again when Nyara adjusted the angle of the pistol without saying a word. The bald man kept his eyes on the ground, his jaw tight, his hands locked behind his head, like he was afraid even blinking too fast might set something off. Kang Jae-Ryun leaned against the brick wall, forcing himself upright inch by inch. Every movement hurt, but he didn't let it show. His eyes stayed on the girl in front of him, studying her the way he studied everything that didn't make sense right away. She wasn't shaking, she wasn't shouting, she wasn't even breathing hard. Just standing there in a school shirt and sneakers, holding 3 grown men in place, like this was exactly how the night was supposed to end. From the street, tires rolled past, slow at first, then stopping. Someone had seen. A car door slammed, followed by hurried footsteps and the sound of a voice calling out from the corner. "Hey, what's going on back there?" Nyara didn't turn. "Call the police," she said, her eyes still on the men. The voice hesitated, then answered, louder this time. "Already did." More footsteps came after that, not close enough to enter the alley, but close enough to see. Phones came out before anyone else did. That was how it started. One person filming from the sidewalk, the camera shaking as the light from the street lamp caught the scene. 3 men on their knees, a girl holding a gun, and a man in a black suit sitting against the wall with blood on his shirt. Another person started recording from farther back, then another. Nobody knew who Kang Jae-Ryun was yet. Nobody knew who the girl was. All they saw was something that didn't make sense. By the time the police sirens echoed in the distance, the first video had already been sent to 3 group chats, 2 social feeds, and 1 account that posted anything that looked like trouble. Within an hour, it was everywhere. The clip was short, grainy, shot from too far away, but the moment was clear. 3 attackers kneeling, 1 girl standing, gun steady, no fear. The caption changed depending on who posted it. Girl stops robbery. Teen saves man from gang. What really happened in this alley? Someone zoomed in on Kang's face in the background, the blood, the suit, the way the officers who arrived spoke to him differently than they spoke to anyone else. That was when the questions started. Who is that man? Why were they beating him? Why didn't the girl run? Why did they listen to her? By morning, the video had crossed the city. By afternoon, it crossed the state. By night, it was on every channel that needed something people wouldn't stop watching. Reporters stood outside the alley with microphones. Commentators argued over the footage. Experts replayed the same 5 seconds again and again, trying to explain how 3 grown men ended up on their knees in front of someone who looked like she should have been walking home from school. Nobody had the full story yet. Nobody knew the names. But one thing was already clear to anyone who watched the clip more than once. Those men hadn't kneeled because they wanted to. They kneeled because the girl standing in front of them had given them no other choice. And somewhere in a quiet office across the city, Victor Halverson watched the video on his phone without blinking. When it ended, he didn't replay it. He just set the phone down slowly, his expression tightening for the first time in days. Because he understood something most of the people watching didn't. That alley wasn't supposed to end like that, and now that it had, someone was going to have to answer for it. By the next morning, the alley had already been washed clean. The stains on the pavement were gone. The trash bags had been moved. The police tape that blocked the entrance overnight hung loose now, one end flapping in the wind like the whole thing had never mattered. But the story hadn't gone anywhere. It was everywhere. Every channel had the same clip playing on repeat, the same 5 seconds of 3 men on their knees and a girl standing in front of them with a gun that never shook. Reporters talked over the footage like they could explain it if they used enough words. Nobody could, because nobody knew why the attack happened, not yet. Inside a quiet conference room downtown, the television was on, but the sound was muted. The screen showed the alley again. The image paused on the moment the first attacker hit the ground. Victor Halverson stood near the window, his hands in his pockets, watching the reflection of the screen in the glass instead of the screen itself. Behind him, one of his assistants held a tablet, scrolling through messages that kept coming faster than he could read them. "They're asking if the victim is connected to the property transfers," the assistant said carefully. Victor didn't answer. Another message appeared. "And the police want confirmation on whether your company had any disputes with Kang Jae-Ryun." That name hung in the room longer than the others. Victor turned slowly. "Had?" he repeated. The assistant swallowed. "Yes, sir." Victor walked back to the table and picked up the remote, pausing the video exactly on the frame where Nyara stood with the gun raised. He stared at the image for a long moment, his expression flat, controlled, the way it always was when he was thinking. "This wasn't supposed to be public," he said quietly. No one replied. On the other side of the city, the police station felt different than it usually did. Too many people moving at once, too many doors opening and closing, too many voices speaking in low tones that stopped when someone else walked by. Detective Marla Keene sat at her desk with a stack of reports spread in front of her, the alley footage playing on her monitor for the 10th time. She didn't watch the girl, she watched the men, the way they moved, the way they waited, the way they didn't run when they could have. This wasn't random, she muttered. Her partner leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "You saying robbery gone wrong?" Marla shook her head. "No, I'm saying they weren't there to rob him at all." She reached for the file on top of the stack and flipped it open, tapping the page with her finger. Property transfers. 3 buildings, same week, same buyer. Halverson Group. Her partner frowned. "What does that have to do with this?" Marla clicked the mouse, bringing up another report on the screen. "Because Kang Jae-Ryun owned the land under 2 of these properties," she said, "and somebody's been trying to buy it for months." Silence filled the room for a second. On the monitor, the video kept playing, the moment frozen right before Nyara moved. Her partner let out a slow breath. "You think this was a hit?" Marla didn't look away from the screen. "I think," she said quietly, 3 men didn't risk killing someone like Kang Jae-Ryun in the middle of the city unless somebody very sure of himself told them to." Across town, Victor Halverson's phone lit up again on the table. This time he picked it up. The message was only one line. "Police requesting meeting, urgent." Victor read it once, then locked the screen. For the first time since the video started spreading, his jaw tightened just enough to notice. Because the plan had been simple. Kang Jae-Ryun was supposed to disappear, the properties were supposed to change hands, and nobody was supposed to ask questions. Instead, 3 men were in custody, the boss was still alive, and the girl who wasn't supposed to exist had just put the entire city on edge. Victor Halverson had built his reputation on one rule: never panic in public. Deals went wrong all the time. Investors argued, tenants complained. Inspectors showed up asking questions nobody wanted to answer. Through all of it, Victor stayed the same. Calm voice, steady hands, the kind of control that made other people doubt themselves before they doubted him. That was why the men who worked for him weren't worried at first, even after the video spread, even after the police started asking about the alley. even after Kang Jae-Ryun's name appeared in reports that weren't supposed to exist. They had seen Victor talk his way out of worse. "He'll handle it," one of them said outside the office building that afternoon, lighting a cigarette with shaking fingers he pretended weren't shaking. "He always does." Inside, the conference room felt colder than usual. Detective Marla Keene sat across the table with a thin folder in front of her, her expression unreadable. Two other officers stood near the door, not speaking, not moving, just watching the man at the head of the table. Victor adjusted the cuff of his shirt before sitting down, like this was another meeting he didn't expect to last long. "You said this was urgent," he said. Marla slid the folder across the table without answering. Victor opened it slowly. Phone records, transfer orders, property contracts, security footage from a parking garage 3 nights before the attack. His eyes stopped on the last photo. 3 men getting out of a van, the same 3 men now sitting in holding cells downtown. Victor closed the folder carefully, placing his hand on top of it like the papers might try to move on their own. "This proves nothing," he said. Marla leaned back in her chair. "It proves you met with them," she replied. "It proves you paid them. It proves Kang Jae-Ryun was attacked the same week you tried to force him out of 2 properties you couldn't buy." Victor didn't answer. For the first time since he walked in, the room stayed quiet long enough for the sound of the air vent to be heard overhead. "You made a mistake," Marla said finally. Victor looked up, his eyes sharp again, searching for the angle he could still use. "What mistake?" Marla tapped the last page in the folder. "You picked the wrong night." Victor frowned slightly. She turned the page around so he could see the still image printed at the bottom. Nyara standing in the alley, gun raised, 3 men on their knees. "That girl wasn't part of your plan," Marla said. Victor's jaw tightened, just enough. "No," he admitted. Across the city, the fallout moved faster than anyone expected. The 3 attackers started talking before sunset. Names came out first, then numbers, then the accounts where the money had come from. Every lead pointed back to the same place, Halverson Group. By evening, warrants were signed. By night, the offices were locked. The rival syndicate that had been waiting to take Kang Jae-Ryun's territory didn't get the chance to move. Kang moved first, not with noise, not with threats, with calls. Contracts changed hands. Accounts froze. Men who thought they were protected found out they weren't. By midnight, the people who had been waiting for Kang to fall understood something they should have remembered from the start. He hadn't survived this long by being lucky. He survived because the moment someone tried to take something from him, he made sure they lost more than they planned. Victor Halverson sat alone in the interview room long after the officers left, the folder still on the table in front of him. For the first time in years, there was nothing he could say to change what was coming. The plan had been perfect. The timing had been perfect. The men had been chosen carefully. Everything should have worked, except for one thing he never saw coming. A girl walking home through the wrong alley at the wrong time, who turned out to be exactly the wrong person to cross. The community center didn't look much different from the outside. The paint was still chipped near the door, and the sign above the entrance still hung slightly crooked like it had for years. Most people driving past wouldn't notice anything had changed at all. They would see the same cracked parking lot, the same old brick walls, the same place they always assumed nobody important ever went. Inside, it felt different. The lights stayed on longer now. The mats on the floor were new. The broken windows in the back room had been replaced with clean glass that let the afternoon sun fall across the training space in wide, bright lines. Kids filled the room, their voices echoing off the walls as they tried to copy the movements they were being shown. "Feet first," Nyara said, her voice calm but firm. "Not fast, balanced." A boy near the front lost his footing and stumbled into the mat, laughing as he pushed himself back up. The others laughed with him, until Nyara raised one hand slightly, not angry, just enough to bring the room back under control. "Again," she said. They reset their stance, shoes squeaking softly against the floor. Most of them didn't know the full story. They knew the video. Everyone did. 3 men in an alley, a girl with a gun, a moment nobody could explain. But to them, Nyara wasn't the girl from the clip. She was the one who showed up every afternoon, the one who corrected their balance, the one who told them to breathe before they moved. Marcus Hale leaned against the wall near the door, arms crossed, watching the class the same way he always watched. Quiet, patient, letting the room speak for itself. "You've got more of them every week," he said. Nyara nodded without looking over. "They keep coming?" Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile. That's what happens when people realize strength doesn't look the way they thought it did.
Near the back of the room, the door opened without anyone noticing at first. A man stepped inside, dressed in a black coat, his posture straight despite the faint stiffness in the way he moved. The light from the hallway caught his face for a moment before he stopped near the wall, far enough away that the class wouldn't see him unless they were looking for him. Kang Jae-Ryun stood there without speaking. He watched the room the way he watched everything, slowly, carefully, taking in every detail before letting himself react. The kids lined up again, their feet uneven, their arms in the wrong position, their attention drifting, until Nyara walked down the row and adjusted each one without saying much. "Control first," she told them. "Speed later." One of the smaller girls looked up at her. "Is it true," she asked quietly, "that you made 3 men kneel?" The room went still for a second, the other kids turning just enough to listen. Nyara didn't answer right away. She straightened the girl's stance, nudging her foot back an inch until the balance was right. "It's true," she said finally, her voice calm. "How?" Nyara met the girl's eyes for a moment, then stepped back. "I didn't make them kneel," she said. She raised her hand slightly, showing them the position again. "I just didn't move when I was supposed to be afraid." The kids watched her more closely after that. Across the room, Kang Jae-Ryun remained where he was, his expression unreadable, his hands resting at his sides. He didn't interrupt. He didn't step forward. He only watched as the girl who had saved his life walked between the rows of children, correcting their balance the same way she had once learned to correct her own. For the first time since the night in the alley, he allowed himself the smallest nod. Not to her, to the room. Because men like him built power in silence. But moments like this built something stronger. And this time the city would remember the girl who made 3 killers kneel, not because she wanted anyone to know her name, but because she refused to live in a world where fear decided who got to stand.